Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
Hey everyone, you're listening to Code Switch. I'm B.A. Parker. To be a Palestinian American writer right now can lead to a lot of expectation to focus on identity and devastation, like in all caps, and not get into the nuance and humanity of any one person's experience. You know, crushes, hopes for yourself and your kids' futures. Betty Shamieh has dealt with that kind of expectation as a Palestinian American playwright.
I think my joy in life is making people laugh and telling stories. And I always felt like I started out in theater because I didn't want to be alone writing books. Mm-hmm. And I also thought it would be a good way to get a boyfriend. And then I realized there's not a lot of straight men working in theater. It's a small percentage.
But after 20 years of writing plays and even finding love, Betty decided it was time to take the lonely road and sit down to write an intergenerational novel, Too Soon. And in it, her main character, Arabella, is looking for love in some of the same places as Betty did.
Too Soon is the tale of three unapologetically bold, salacious, and ambitious Palestinian American women who are determined to wring an acceptable amount of joy out of a world that is not designed for them to do so. I started with Arabella, who's a hip young theater director, looking for a dude to be her man. And then the grandma showed up. And she was like, I'm going to have my say too. And I get to have some salacious experience. I get to be fully human in the way that Arabella is. So I feel like this book is a melding of, as much as it's inspired by sagas like God of Small Things, it's also like The Devil Wears Prada in that it's a deep dive into a very particular industry in Manhattan, which is theater. And it's got the kind of Sex and the City exploration of Manhattan life from the perspective of a woman who's prone to dramatics.
She is prone to dramatics.
She is.
Shamieh has established herself as an important Palestinian American voice in the American theater. And having that platform has meant exploring the complexities of being a modern woman and searching for those complexities in women from the past.
Being a Palestinian American is both, particularly at this time, but always a great position of privilege vis-a-vis other people in my community. But it's also a precarious position in this society, in this world. And so the book, for me, is kind of a melding of what it is to be incredibly privileged. And as an American, I am privileged, but also what it means to also be incredibly vulnerable. And as a Palestinian, I am also vulnerable. So that's why the book couldn't live in the, kind of saga. This is a dramatic story. It had to have the kind of lightness of what it is to be an artist living and working and struggling in New York.
And so for today's show, I talk with Betty Shamieh about writing her book and how her characters just want to be free.
This message comes from Schwab. At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more.
This message comes from NPR sponsor REI Co-op. You can't make more time, but when you opt outside, you can make the most of it. So make time for those early mornings, last-minute trips, and timeless views. For small victories, big fails, and everything in between. And when you're ready, REI has the gear, clothing, classes, and advice to help you make the most of your time out there. Visit your local REI Co-op or rei.com/opt-outside. Support for the following message comes from LinkedIn Ads. As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the digital ad space can be. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it just disappears into the noise. By using LinkedIn ads, you can reach professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Target them by job title, industry, company, and more. Get a $100 credit on your next campaign at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
In her novel, Too Soon, Betty Shamieh wants people to see the humanity in her characters.
When you put a Palestinian story into the world, you know that there's people who are just not going to be capable or willing or want to see your humanity. And the fact of a book that written by you means that you're a human. I often say you can't change hearts and minds if they're connected to hands that will never pick up a book by someone like you. But,
Betty.
ooh, I know. Because you come up as somebody who has to have blinders on about how difficult it is to represent your community in a culture where you're regularly demonized. And I don't use dehumanized because I feel like that, for me, is not the right term, because I feel like if people treated puppies the way they treated people from my community, there would be more outrage than there is. That it's actually a demonization from birth till death that you're struggling against. So I've had to have blinders on and be like, I'm going to be able to make it in New York theater. I'm going to be able to write a book and people are going to hear it and see it and have enough curiosity. Because I think when you don't read widely, it's a lack of fundamental curiosity. The point of reading is not to reinforce your own experiences. You could wake up and have that experience. And this is what I think people who love theater or people who love books are addicted to. It's the idea that you want to know more than you can by just existing within your own skin. You're so in love with life that you want to know what you can only know by stepping out of your skin. Mm-hmm. This book erupted out of me. And I've never had that experience. I've been writing for a minute, but I've never had the experience of something wanting to exist in the world more than I wanted to sit down and write it.
Your main character, Arabella,
yes,
or one of your main characters, is similar to you in some ways.
Yes.
In some ways. She is also in theater, also Palestinian. How did your work influence the character of Arabella?
Well, I'm in all of my characters. That's something I admit them. She is very similar to me in terms of like being devoted to theater, being really, really obsessed with a theater community that's very small and very few people care about it, frankly, in the world, in the universe. I think what she struggles with is what I think every Palestinian American artist or person in the world is struggling with right now, is how do you balance the need for you to be responsible to yourself and responsible for your community at the same time. And she falls short flagrantly more often than not. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of my nightmare of who I could be. You know what I mean? More, I am, if you know me in the theater, I put a character called Lisa Turn Layla, who's very out there and like, let's go do projects in the Middle East. And that character is much more similar to how I function in American theater. And she also wears ridiculous outfits, which I did in my 20s. So if you know me and you live and work in the theatrical world, you'd probably say that's more like Betty than Arabella, because also she's a director and I'm a writer. And to be a director, it's about being a leader. It's about standing up and being like, you move and you say and you talk and you do. And being a writer is kind of more of a gentle role than that. And I have incredible admiration for the female directors that have come up. And one of the things, you can't really tell how sexism works when it comes to yourself. For example, I don't know if I was a male playwright, how my career might look different. But in terms of watching, having gone to, some of the best schools, working with some of the best directors, the women are as talented as the men, and they're not in the same stratosphere in terms of access and visibility. They're not allowed to be up at bat as directors the way that men are. Men can fail and fail and fail and fail, and women cannot as directors. And so even though Arabella shares a lot with me, she's more modeled on the kind of badass female directors who took my work and heralded me and shaped me as an artist, and also made the actors stand where they have to stand in the light, bow when they had to bow, and all the things. I would rather do anything than have to tell a group of people what to do and make them do it.
But I mean, the playwright is God. They're like you got the soft power. They have to say your words or there's no show.
And what I say also in Too Soon is what's annoying about playwrights is they expect everybody to say the words that they want them to say. So they're going to wait for the apology whether or not you feel like giving it. And so, yes, it's soft power, but it is not the same sort of leadership skills that directors require, the same sort of interpersonal skills. That might be the better way to say it.
Yeah. Okay. So when you first started writing this book, it was a decade ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did you imagine then that when you finished the book that folks would be more open to hearing a Palestinian American perspective?
After 9/11, I had just done a show. I just graduated from drama school, and I did a show called Chocolate and Heat, Growing Up Arab in America. And all the characters were Arabs, but they didn't talk about being Arabs. So it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek downtown kind of thing that you do where you invite people into a show about ethnicity and show them a show about people and ask them to make their own conclusions. Mm-hmm. So I became a very visible Arab, literally August of 2001. And so I was invited to speak on many, many panels about how has my life changed as a Palestinian American now that this catastrophic loss of life happened within blocks of me and my community. And, and I said, you know what, there was such resistance to our perspective before 9/11 that there was really nowhere for it to go after 9/11. So I'd be on panels and they'd be like, tell us how your life has changed. I'm like, it hasn't changed that much. And I guess I feel yes, we are in the news. Mm-hmm. And what is happening to the Palestinian community can only, for me, the way I can describe it, is it's watching the Trail of Tears being live streamed. And having learned of the Trail of Tears and having language for what that is, or the Middle Passage, watching something that you heard about in history happening now, but it's also on your live stream feed. So it's this moment of this has always been happening. Everybody's watching it at this particular moment. It's more extreme than I can fathom. For me, I can't fathom the walls coming down around me. I can't fathom being moved from place to place with just the clothes on your back. I can fathom systematic starvation. I can fathom not having milk for my kid. So that's where I am in terms of this particular moment, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I'm thinking about in the book, I believe it was Naya who, when she's in Detroit, Naya immediately draws the parallel between how Black people are treated in Detroit with how Palestinians are treated back home. And this cycle of empathy that we can all kind of have the comparisons and we can see the humanity and what that kind of cruelty looks like within different marginalized groups is really interesting to me. So.
Well, for me, the Black community can't even describe how supportive and kind and important. But even more than their embrace of my work, which is huge, it's the model of how you face unrelenting derision and create beauty and insist upon your humanity and support your community. I'm able to say and see in the face of violence, one can be an artist and one can insist upon being an artist. And I think in stories. I don't think in sound bites. I don't express myself in terms of like things that you can watch and say, now I feel inspired and alive. I tell stories. And so I kind of have to stay in my own lane in that way, which is challenging in this moment. But it's also empowering. I have to only be and do what I can do to the best of my ability, as a storyteller. And so the reality of I know that there's people who cannot hear my voice right now is something I've had to kind of subjugate, because to me, I'm trying to reach everyone. And I also have this belief, and it's harder and harder to hold on to it, that in 50 years, the Middle East is going to look like the EU, that everyone's going to be able to live where they want to live. And when people say, that's crazy, I say, look at the history of Europe. They had 2 world wars and, genocide, and they figured it out. So it's kind of myopic to think that the Middle East can't change. But as I get older, that 50-year mark seems to be one that I might not reach in my lifetime. So that's, I think, the way that I've kind of had to move through, American society as a Palestinian, where there's not much representation of our voice seen or allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, there's the sequence in your book that I guess I just never thought about, like, the mundanity of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
I was learning how to navigate entering Israel as a Palestinian through Arabella's experience.
Yes.
And it frustrated me, but I also kind of loved it because it was, a world outside of my own. And I was learning about, like, how no one really talks to each other on the plane because you don't know who is going to be, divided once you get off that plane. But can you describe for me, for someone who hasn't lived it, what that's like?
Well, I think the hardest thing about being a Palestinian who tries to return or who lives there who has not left is that you do not know what is going to happen. Like, sometimes they let you through, sometimes they retain you for 8 hours, sometimes they don't let you through. And I think that sense of powerlessness, but also, like, it's one thing if you know the bridge is going to be stopped for 2 hours. You know what I mean? And it's another thing if there's no reason why you're being detained for 8 hours or why you're being let through or why you're not being let through at all. So the randomness of the Palestinian experience is, I think, what's oftentimes, like, you don't know what to brace yourself for. Like, I get on a flight and I don't know what is going to happen at the other end. Sometimes they just are like, come on through. Sometimes and I think the more visible I am as an artist, many of my artist friends have had a harder time the more visibility you have. Mm-hmm. And you're still the same person. You're still, American Betty. So you're not any more of a threat or a danger, I don't think, in anyone's eyes, except that you don't know what you're going to get on the other end. So I'm concerned about the next time I try to go in. My family's from the West Bank, and my grandfather's house is there. And that's where I tend to stay when I visit or work. And it's just worth noting that, I'm a child of Oslo, and the peace process has made life worse. For the Palestinians who have not elected Hamas, who live in the West Bank, and so that's just worth noting that, like, Gaza's its own thing, but West Bank is also pretty much on fire at this point, and very unsafe and very unstable in terms of you can't go to school, you can't go to work, you can't go to the hairdresser without knowing how long these things are going to take you. And that's how my life would have been every day in Ramallah if my family hadn't left.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We can get back to the book. Please make it about the book. I just want to talk about my book.
Sure, we can talk about the book. We can talk about the book. Coming up, we talk about the book and romance.
She's in love with my favorite book boyfriend, Aziz. You know, like...
He's so dreamy. In my mind, he's like swashbuckling. He's going to Gaza to like stitch people up. I'm like, I'm into it. Stay with us.
Support for the following message come from LinkedIn Ads. With LinkedIn Ads, you can reach professionals relevant to your business. Target them by job title, industry, company, and more by launching your next campaign with a free $100 ad credit at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
This message comes from ADP. ADP knows any new technology, any old competitor, any trendy thing, even a trendy thing that everyone knows isn't a great idea, but management just wants us to give it a try for a bit, can change the world of work. So whether it's a last-minute policy change or adding a new company holiday, ADP designs forward-thinking solutions to help businesses take on the next anything. ADP, always designing for people.
This message comes from Homes.com. What kind of programs does this school have? How are the test scores? These are all things parents ask when they home shop. That's why each listing on Homes.com includes extensive reports on local schools. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Parker, just Parker. Code switch. I've been talking to Betty Shamieh, Palestinian American playwright and first-time author. Her debut novel, Too Soon, tells the story of 3 generations of Palestinian women. Grandmother Zoya, who left her home for the States, Mother Naya, who grew up mostly between Detroit and New York City, and Arabella, who was looking for love and purpose as a director in New York's theater scene. The book so clearly describes what it means to, be a young woman in the city being attracted to a man, and then they say something dumb, and then you immediately get the ick, and you're like, oh, that's right. I don't like him anymore. And then the next day, maybe I do like him. Then no, I don't like him. But he knows this one thing about me, and no one else knows it. Maybe that's nice.
Yeah.
It's like a push and pull.
And it is. And I think from my own experience, I have a lot of friends who are still in that. This guy's okay for now. And then one of you dies. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I do believe that certain people are cut from the same, I call the cloth of your soul is the same. But also life is incredibly hard. And that's, I think, for me, the tragedy of racism. Because humanity as a whole is not that great. There's not that many people that you vibe with. There's not that many fantastic, partners in the world. So if you're limiting who you're allowed to love to, your race or your class or your education level, you're going to have a hard go of it. You gotta look through all of humanity to find fantastic people. And I think one gift that my family gave me was they found me hilarious. They found me delightful. And I moved through the world with the sense that if you don't like me because I'm Palestinian, you're missing out. And that is a thing that I think that BIPOC people need to give to their children, the sense of you're not trying to be accepted by other people. You're trying to invite them into the fabulousness that is you. And if they can't vibe with that, that's an immense loss on their part.
Okay, this is a side note. We'll veer for a second because
Sure.
it's just like a personal complaint that I have about theater,
Yes.
especially for playwrights of color. What becomes popularized feels very didactic, as feeling like you have to explain your existence on stage to a predominantly white audience. And so I'll sit through a show and I'm like, oh, this isn't for me. Like, I don't need you to explain. But I think it harkens to the thing you were talking about for 20 years you had to be representative.
And what is funny is I did that for 20 years. And I also did it in a very particular way. I purposely chose not to tell stories that reinforce stereotypes about Arab men. I never had an honor killing play, which I felt like would have won me major accolades in a Broadway production. But I just felt like my place in this world is not to demonize Arab men, because when you've demonized them, it's easier to kill them. And as a mother of a son who's 10, he's a little boy, and he's always going to be a little boy to me. And when you see, like, this many women and children have been killed, it dehumanizes the men.
Yeah. And in your book, you are able to humanize not only Arab men, but also Israeli men through the character Arabella's love interests.
To me, one of the most fun things is that she's in love with an Israeli American, and she's in love with a Palestinian American, and she's in love with everybody.
She's got options.
She's got options, and they're very different options. But I really wanted to show that I really understand and can humanize anyone. And that was really important for me as a writer.
Yeah.
So much of our discourse is, this Palestinian American writer is talking about this issue, and this Israeli American writer is talking about that issue. And nobody's really saying, like, wouldn't it be interesting if we could talk about each other's issues?
I mean, it would be nice. Okay, so in the book, one of the big sequences is, Arabella gets invited to direct a Shakespearean production overseas and has to go to Ramallah. This is always a part of that yearning for the diaspora trying to return, even though she's really hesitant and doesn't want to do this, really. What did that journey mean to you to have to write that?
Well, it's even worse than that. She's isolated herself and alienated everyone in New York theater, and this is her one last gig. And so she doesn't want to go. This is the last trip she wants to make. This is not something she wants to do. She wants to be on Broadway. She wants to be working on Shakespeare on Broadway. This is her world. And so the fact that she has to do the reverse journey of her grandmother, which is essentially go back to a place that her family fled, she kind of goes kicking and screaming. And I feel like it is so challenging to live a life of privilege and ease and then to go witness what your life would be like if your family never left. And I think that is part of the difficulty, facing the fact that she's here because her family chose to do what so many people hope Palestinians do, which is just leave. And then she goes back and has to face what her life would have been like if they didn't make that choice. And, she's in love with my favorite book boyfriend, Aziz.
He's so dreamy. In my mind, he's like swashbuckling. He's going to Gaza to like stitch people up. I'm like, I'm into it.
And he's actually inspired by a very dashing, his name is Tarek Lubani, and I hope he doesn't mind that I'm calling him out. I've never met him, but he was every Arab American girl's dream. He went to Gaza, got shot in the legs twice, is still walking, came back, and created, I believe it's a company for medical supplies. And what was amazing is he had in his pocket something that could have helped him with his leg. And he's like, no, other people need it more. And what's hilarious is when you're Palestinian American, that's your book boyfriend. Like, everybody else likes Brad Pitt. You're like watching Tarek Lubani on like Democracy Now! Or some major news show and going, that's the guy that I want to date. What's also hilarious is he is not a perfect match for self-centered Arabella. She ain't trying to live in Gaza.
Respectfully, I'm like, Aziz is great. He's an Aiden. And Carrie can't handle no Aiden.
Arabella can't handle no Aziz. Yeah. And so it's inspired by this guy that everybody I know was in love with. But my character Arabella could not relate to the fact that she says his primary identity is being Palestinian, where mine is being director. And so, he thinks it's a duty to have more Palestinian children. And she's like, I got a show to direct, and I can't carry. I'm 35. I can't carry 4 babies for you. And yet, Artistic Yoav wants to go off to Bali every 5 minutes, and he don't want no kids. So it's like, who do you choose? And I don't want to ruin the ending, but she makes her own choices, and I believe I give her a happy day. I give her everything she kind of wants at the end of the story in the way that she wants it.
So what does liberation mean for Arabella?
Well, for me, and I think for my character, liberation means living life on your own terms and being fulfilled artistically and finding ways to continue to work as an artist when the doors are closed to you. And whether or not children come into that or a man comes into that, like I said, they I mean, it makes me sound horrible, but I just feel like we hang out with people and then we die. Do you know what I mean? Like, so like, like I said, I have a lot of women who are single and they're like, is this the right one? I'm like, he is for now and he might not be for later. And that's how we have to live. And then one of us gets taken out. You know what I mean? Eventually. And I know it's so intense, but it's also freeing because you don't have to like, oh, this is a life choice I'm making and this is the man that I'm living with and this is the family I'm creating. No. And, and you may live with them for the rest of your life. And most people hope when they encounter somebody that they adore that they will. But I think the idea that we don't have many different lives and permutations of that life is something that we don't tell ourselves, our younger selves or our current selves. We think that we have to make these decisions, and we do, but they're for now.
Oh, boy. There's a moment when Zoya is on the phone with Naya, and she's like, oh, she's free, Naya. Can't we let one of us be free? And you think about every generation of grandmother who has had to make some kind of sacrifice for, like, their future children, and they see their grandchild living the life that you've always kind of wanted for them. And you're like, and now we want her to get married? She's out here, like, I say this is like, a young woman living in the city in my one-bedroom apartment.
Yes.
My mom is like, you're living the dream, aren't you? Are you going to bring a man into it?
Yes, and that is why I wrote the story, that connection between 3 generations of women. And what does it mean to be like, no, I'm going to say no to that? Because that means you won't have grandchildren to, like, terrorize and call up and, or love, you know what I mean, in the way that Zoya really does love Arabella, even though she's flawed and not always to be trusted.
I love the yearning that Zoya has throughout. Because I guess, I don't know, you forget that, like, your grandmother's a person.
Yes.
And that your grandmother has, like, once and, like, is sitting there looking at
Big Aziz.
And has, like, all this desire that just, like, holding his hand is enough.
And I have to say, the story of the hand-holding was inspired not by my grandma, but by another woman who was, a little too friendly on the boat. And I met her as an older lady, and they were like, yeah, she was a little friendly on that boat. And I was, I was an old lady, and I was like, good for her. Good for her to be friendly on a boat. You know what I mean? Coming over. But what was hilarious is she looked, like grandma. And they had their emotions and their feelings. And you could have 9 kids, but if, a sexy Aziz walks in, you are just human again. And that's, and that's, I think that's what will surprise people about Too Soon. And that's what I love about, getting notes from booksellers in small, rural, Midwestern towns saying, I'm going to hand sell this book because it's about my grandmother's experience. And that's so much fun as a writer because I do have to believe that someday the world's going to look like a different place and that my books have to be human in order to have a life after that moment.
Betty Shamieh, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you, Parker. This has been such a thrill.
And that's our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email is more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter. And just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and public media, and we get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/codeswitch. This episode was produced by Christina Kala. It was edited by Dahlia Murtada and Courtney Stein. Our engineer was Quasi Lee. And a big shout out to the rest of the Code Switch Massive: Xavier Lopez, Jess Kung, Leah Dinella, Verlin Williams, and Jean Demby. I'm B.A. Parker. Hydrate.
This message comes from NPR sponsor REI Co-op. You can't make more time, but when you opt outside, you can make the most of it. So make time for those early mornings, last-minute trips, and timeless views for small victories, big fails, and everything in between. And when you're ready, REI has the gear, clothing, classes, and advice to help you make the most of your time out there. Visit your local REI Co-op or rei.com/opt-outside. This message comes from Warby Parker. What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost, like free adjustments for life. Find your pair at warbyparker.com or visit one of their hundreds of stores around the country. This message comes from Bombas. Nearly 30% of marathoners end their race blistered. Bombas running socks are strategically cushioned to help say bye to blisters. Run to bombas.com/NPR and use code NPR for 20% off your first purchase.